And we've still got flowers which I think have survived the frost, the delphiniums and the helianthus, the dahlias. And some plants are flowering abnormally late this year as a result of the summer drought. For example, this ginger. This is Assam orange. And in a normal year, it will grow about 50% bigger, and the flowers will appear in July and August and be coming to an end now. But actually, they just started to appear a week or so ago. But better late than never. Now, coming up on today's programme, Sue is making changes to her garden and planting for next year.
I'm planting salsify, which is a vegetable that has beautiful flowers. I'm hoping these lovely vegetables will bring a bit of life to my border in the spring.
Adam visits a garden designed to sustain its beauty into autumn and beyond.
Well, things like the hydrangea, that'll sit there all winter, won't it?
It's that sort of form and shape with the frost sitting on it.
Yeah.
It looks lovely. So, yeah, the solidity of the plants in here do really take you right through winter.
We meet an amateur plantsman who has turned what was an ordinary back garden into his exotic oasis.
I've tried to recreate some of the lush planting at the back here using hardy plants. And so I've got banana plants here and these gingers.
And I shall be pruning a climbing rose and planting the spring colour. Come on, dogs. Ned and I are just putting the finishing touches to this border. Now, last week, I started the process of completely reassessing and recreating this writing garden. The shrubs have come out, we've salvaged the bulbs, and I can start the process of planting now, because if you can plant perennials and biennials in October and the first part of November, the roots go into warm soil, they get established, and then next spring they will grow away better, and also, crucially, and perhaps increasingly important, they will cope with drought much better. So, first thing to do is to make sure we don't compact the soil. Good boy. We haven't dug the soil over, but what we have to is spread a layer of mulch. And that will work in, and as I plant things, I'll dig it in, and then we'll mulch again next spring when all the planting is finished. Can I have this, please? Thank you. Let's start with these. This is an Astrantia white giant, and it has these multi-petal flower heads tipped with green, and will flower from late May well into July. Now I'm going to couple these with a plant that I haven't grown before. It's Cenolophium, or the Baltic parsley. And it has an umbel that rises up about 1 metre or 4 feet. And umbellifers are the basis for the planting. And I'm going to grow it in conjunction with the Astrantia. Now what I have here is a perennial that I've grown from seed. It's still quite small. This is Selenum. And again, you've got this light, frothy, cow parsley-like foliage and a lovely white umbellifer as a flower. And the beauty of this is it flowers quite late in the year. It will start to flower in July and carry on into September or even October. I've got some biennials as well. Now, this is a foxglove, confusingly called Digitalis purpurea, but it's alba, a white foxglove. And this is a white hesperus, or sweet rocket. And sweet rocket normally has sort of mauvey coloured flowers, but this white version is absolutely lovely. Now the hesperus likes some sunshine, so this will be over on this side, but the foxgloves are actually woodland plants that like dappled shade. So I will place some of these at the back. Now, don't be tempted to go for big plants. Far better to buy 5 small plants rather than 2 or 3 bigger ones. It'll cost you half the amount of money, and actually they will establish and grow twice as well. Now, every cell in my body wants to plant this. It's the thing I love most in gardening, but I'm going to resist it, because I would strongly advise that when you're planting a new border or revamping one like this, is you place the plants and then go away, go and have a cup of tea even, and come back and reassess it. So give it a break, even if it's a matter of days, because moving plants in pots is a lot easier and better for the plants than moving them once they're in the ground. Right, whilst I'm resisting the urge to plant, let's join Sue in her garden near Swansea, where she's having a revamp too, but for different reasons. I'm trying to recapture the essence of the original garden, where she is fighting the elements in the shape of the wind that blows in from the sea.
When I designed this part of the garden, I wanted a long flight of steps down into the next lawn, but it's become a bit dangerous. As my eyes have deteriorated and the sun shines directly at my face when I'm coming down the stairs, I can't differentiate one step from the other. So I've come up with a very cheap and cheerful idea so I can see the edge of the steps clearly. I'm using a stencil. So I think that's enough paint. So practice makes perfect, and I've got more to do later. But for the meantime, I've got jobs to do in the rest of the garden. With the climate being mild here, autumn is a nice time for me to do some work to prepare my spring borders, so that in the busy spring months, when the vegetables are my focus, the beds will look good straight away. I've got one border I've been meaning to deal with for ages, and today is the day to take action. This is my wild and windy border. I tend to just plonk plants in and hope for the best, and then the wind comes in and takes them out. It needs a bit of a redesign. There are some key plants that work well in the winds: the fennel, the lavender and the Japanese anemones. My fennel's got a bit big and needs removing, and my lavender's got a bit leggy and needs to come out. And I've spotted something else that also needs removing. So I'm going to go and get my spade and have a bit of a fight. I love Acanthus mollis when it's in the right place, but this isn't in the right place. It's also known as bear's breeches, and these seeds can shoot for up to 10 foot and make new plants. So it's important to get the plant out before it sends its seed. It's important to try and get every bit of root out, but it's difficult and I may not succeed the first time. So in the spring, I'll have to be very vigilant and see if it's coming up again. You can see here, I've snapped a bit of the root there. There's a long bit of root back there. So I'm going to dig it over and see if I can find some more. Oh, look, there's one of the seeds. It's a bit, you know, you've got to be very thorough and still you might not win. But perseverance will eventually pay off. This used to be full of it, and now there's only a few. Next, I'm going to get on with a job that will give the garden a fabulous boost in spring. I love alliums. They give me flowers when often there's not a lot going on. These are going to go into my new flower border. Because it's not structurally ready yet, I'm going to plant the alliums in pots. And then when they grow and they poke their heads above the soil in spring, I'll transfer them into the border to exactly where I want them. What I've chosen are these lovely nectar Gordon Siculum. And they smell delicious, of like honey and garlic. And I'm going to put 3 each in a pot. Put them with the flatter bit down and then the sort of pointy bit up. The second ones, these are my sort of favourite. These are Sphaerocephalon, and I love these. They're also known as drumsticks. And my final choice is allium hair. Now, think of my hair with bits of pink in and you'll get the picture. So I'm going to have a lovely sort of pinky, greeny theme to the whole, you know, allium look in May and June. And if it works, I think it's going to look wonderful. I'm going to water these later and put them somewhere sheltered. Got a real sense of anticipation for the spring. With the lavender removed, I can now get on with adding more plants to my bed. But to keep it affordable, I've gone round the garden, finding plants to fill in the space, making the most of the resources I have and growing the rest from seed. To make the changes to this bed, I've decided, so I don't make the same mistakes again, to make a plan. And I've marked where the wind will run through most ferociously. So that means that I have to put certain plants there. I'm going to have to pack the plants in quite tightly because this also helps them to support each other when it is windy. I found by painting the colours in, I get a really good idea. So this is just part of the border and what I think it might look like in spring. So I've got the Lavateria pink, I'm putting in white foxgloves. I've got the Cotinus, which is purple. Then it shows me what's missing and what I could add to the picture to make it even more glorious. So now I'm going to get on and plant it. This is a very free draining soil and I'm in a very mild climate. So it's all right for me to plant lavender at the end of the season like this. But ideally they should be planted in spring, which is what I'm going to be doing with the rest of them as I've still got some annuals flowering where they're going to go. I'm just going to pop it in, pop the soil back in, going to do some firming in, and then give it a quick water. Next, I'm getting in a tall thalictrum to give me the colour spectrum I'm looking for. Today, I want to start my experiment to grow veg for the ornamental flowers. I'm planting salsify, which is a vegetable, but it has beautiful flowers and it can be used in the ornamental border. I'm going to combine it with a third of the tops of parsnips, and when you plant those, they again grow umbel type flowers, which are yellow, and that will look very good with the daisy sort of flowers of the salsify. So I'm hoping, you know, these lovely vegetables will bring a bit of life to my border in the spring. It's going to take a few days for me to get the rest of my plants in the border, but for now I'm going to have a bit of a rest from digging and get on and paint some of my daisies.
Well, I wish Sue good luck with getting rid of her acanthus, because here in the dry garden, it has become a weed. I mean, it's a lovely weed. Acanthus is a wonderful plant, but once you've got it, it's really difficult to get rid of. Now, it's time to prune this climbing rose. It's a hybrid tea climber called Caroline Testute, and it's got wonderful, blousy pink flowers, looks really good, and the best way to tell the difference between a climber and a rambler is a climber tends to have larger flowers and quite often will repeat throughout the season, whereas ramblers tend to be a mass of small flowers that just flower once, usually around about July, and that's it. And there's another really important distinction when it comes to pruning, because climbers grow all their flowers on new shoots. What that means in practice is a shoot like this will not produce any flowers at all next year, but it will produce shoots that produce flowers next year. Now, the more vertical the growth is, the less side shoots it will have, and it's the side shoots that have the flowers. And this is a good example. That will not have any flowers at all. Whereas if I bent it down to the horizontal or even bent it over, you'll get side shoots coming up, growing vertically, and each one of those will have a flower. Probably the thing to do is to tie it in like that at 45 degrees so we get some vigour, because it's sort of vertical, and quite a lot of flowering, because it's sort of horizontal. And what I want to be thinking about is the structure. So these dark greyish-brown shoots are the permanent structure, and now is the time to replace them if you want to. The ideal is if you have a good fan shape coming from the ground up, and then lots of side shoots coming off it. I'm cutting all the side shoots off. And basically you just prune all this year's growth back to stubs, and you'll get new growth from those, and the new growth will have the flowers. I'll plug away at this. This will probably take me another 45 minutes or an hour. And next year I know it will flower really well. So just remember the principles. Get a good structure, cut back the side shoots, and then leave it alone, and it'll be absolutely fine. Okay, I'll tidy up, which will be quite tricky, but while I'm doing that, let's go and visit one of your gardens.
Hello, Gardener's World, and welcome to our garden in the Nene Valley of Northamptonshire. We are Kat and Tim, and our Ukrainian family we have sponsored since May, Olya, Andriy, and Bogdan.
Wait, hello!
In our house, we have always loved homegrown vegetables. And now Olya and her boys help us grow tomatoes, courgettes, chard, and many other seasonal delights like this cucumber Bogdan has discovered. Tim is the main chef in our house, and he loves to cook Italian food. So, our garden is devoted mostly to growing several varieties of tomatoes, so that we can make liters and liters of passata for his fantastic meals. Like most this summer, we have had very little rain. Our harvest, luckily, has survived the drought, and we have been picking tomatoes for a full month now. Once our tomatoes are ready to harvest, we roast them in the oven with olive oil. Andrei is now pureeing the roasted tomatoes through a mouli. One gardening trick I like to use is to layer cardboard over newly planted and watered plants. I dampen the cardboard fully, anything from delivery boxes to cereal boxes, then I layer it thickly with mulch. The soil stays damp longer, and this cuts down on watering and also helps to keep the weeds down. We hope you have enjoyed a short tour of our garden. Thanks for watching, Gardener's World.
Well, I'm glad to see a kindred spirit in the way that Kat and Tim use their tomatoes, because most of the tomatoes we grow here are used in exactly that way, made into sauce that will give you the taste of summer all winter long. Now, we've been growing more and more salvias here over the last few years because they do add real colour that lasts sometimes from June right through to November. And perhaps the most consistent of all the salvias we grow is this one. It's called Salvia curviflora. And it has this extraordinarily intense pink colour. It's almost magenta, that pink which has so much blue in it that it's almost not pink anymore. But actually magenta, which is a much reviled colour in a garden, I think is really useful for setting off other strong colours around it. And it's brilliant at making purples and reds and golds pop and become more intense. So curviflora has become really useful here in the Jewel Garden, as well as being lovely in its own right. I grow, I suppose, about 6 or 7 different types of salvia, but we went to visit a grower in Ceredigion who has become a salvia expert simply through love of the plants, and now she has nearly 100 of them.
I love salvias because they are so varied in colour, height, form, leaf, smell. They come from all over the world, and there's a certain challenge because it's an enormous family and you could never possibly collect them all. They flower for 6 months. They only require a bit of deadheading. There are a lot which are thought of as tender, which will actually take -5 with a bit of mulch. And the tender ones will give you fresh colour in your garden right up to November when pretty much everything else is gone. And they attract lots of beneficial insects. I'm Vicky Weston. I have a salvia nursery here on my 3-acre site, and I grow between 70 and 100 varieties of salvia. Here we've got some of the different types of salvia, starting here with a borderline variety. This is Salvia involucrata Joan, and she'll take certainly down to -5 in a well-drained soil with some mulch. This is one of my absolute favourites. This is Salvia leucantha, known in English as willow leaf sage. This is tender, so I plant these out in the spring and I will take them inside in the winter. And these beautiful stems will arch out to sort of 2 feet with the white flowers, and this is very, very furry. Over here is a whole bed of small-leafed, shrubby-like, totally hardy salvias, the only difference being the colour, going from cherry pie through glacier and raspberry royale. And those I just leave, I don't cut them back. They are mulch, mainly to help me with the weeding, and those will be absolutely fine. They will just shoot again in the spring, hardy to -10. I also grow the European hardy herbaceous forms, which are mostly finished flowering by September, but they can be just left and they'll be back in the spring to flower all over again. I started the cello at 5 before I really knew what a cello was in a non-musical household. I went to specialist music school. It was all going to be cello. I never anticipated doing anything else. And then the pain started. It was discovered I had a tumour on my spinal cord. I'd had 2 babies by then, and so it had got quite bad. And it was operated on, but I've been left with chronic pain and tremor. It's been said many times, but the power of the outdoors is not inconsiderable. And it's now going to be prescribed, isn't it? And so it should be, because if I couldn't get outdoors every day, I think I'd be finished. This lovely thing is Salvia oliganosa, ugly name, English name bog sage, but it's not suitable for planting in a bog. It needs the good drainage that all the rest of them use. But you can see it's quite different. It's tall, it's willowy, it doesn't mind the strong winds I get here at all. It is hardy. It will die back completely and disappear, so it's important to mark it so that you don't inadvertently dig it up while you're weeding. It's a total favourite of mine because I'm an addict of blue, and it's just such a clear colour. I just love it. Salvias are now a huge part of my life, and I've got to know them so much. I can tell from the leaf sometimes which variety it is. But they deserve to have a bigger audience. At the end of the day, they're just very beautiful things.
Well, I certainly noticed on my salvias, and I don't know if Vicky did too, that they seem to take the heat wave and the drought this summer perfectly well. They didn't grow so big, but I didn't water them, and they were absolutely fine, and they're still flowering. Now, these succulents, which are mainly aeoniums, but we've got echeveria too, both need good drainage and hate being too wet. They're fine outside in the summer, and in fact, some are relatively hardy, but the aeoniums are not fully hardy, so they need to come in, and they need to be bone dry. And that's the secret, so they can have rain in summer, but in winter, when it's cooler, just don't water them at all, and they'll be absolutely fine. Now, they're in these very heavy pots, so I've wheeled out Betty. She has been with us for about 10 years. I don't know why she's called Betty. I didn't call her Betty, but it's stuck. And it's incredibly useful, because what Betty will do is turn on her own axis. Look at that. And just whiz her around. There we go. So these now go into the wooden greenhouse, where we keep it frost-free, but that's all. We don't try and heat it up as such. And then they can come out in April. These yellow crocus-like flowers are Sternbergia that flower now in autumn, and they just give this intense flare of colour. And behind them, the saffron crocus. And it is incredible when you think that saffron is produced just from these tiny little stamens. It's such a precious thing. Right, still to come on today's programme. Adam visits a garden full of the shapes and colours of autumn.
You can feel now, as the garden's on the turn, the atmosphere is changing. And interestingly, the light's now
As
changed.
we said that, yeah.
Things come alive, don't they?
Absolutely. So that's what you look for in autumn, isn't it? That beautiful sunlight which is shining on those lovely autumn colours.
And we meet a gardener who combines arid, lush and traditional planting to dramatic effect.
The star of the show has to be this Agavio vatifolia, which is the whale-tongue agave. This agave comes from Mexico, where it can get very cold over winter, and so it's very well adapted to the climate here.
But first, we're going to East Lothian to visit one of your gardens.
Welcome, Gardener's World, to our little garden. We want to show you how much can be done in very little space. We're twins, and I am Helen and I am Morna, and we live in North Berwick. Helen is responsible for all the flowers outside, much admired by passers-by, but I have what I call my little greenhouses, the interior windowsills with citrus plants, etc. Now this mint here, I grew from a cutting, and it was in a small grey pot, and I wanted to see if the roots were coming out the bottom, ready to repot. So I turned the pot up, and I had netting from an orange bag, and I could see trapped between the orange bag netting and the pot was a vine weevil. Couldn't get through. So that's a very good tip for protecting your plants from vine weevil. This is one of my south-facing greenhouse windowsills. This is an nepenthes. Now, how do you feed one of these things? Well, you can either have very dilute orchid fertiliser, or if you find a fly and slot it against the window or something like that, not too big a fly or it suffers from indigestion, and then you pop it into the pitcher. I hope you've seen how many plants can be grown in just a small space, all in pots, outside and inside on the windowsills. So goodbye, Gardener's World, from the twins in North Berwick.
Well, thank you, Helen and Warner. And your garden is lovely, and a great tip about keeping the vine weevil out. Now, of course, this time of year, with the cold, comes fantastic autumn colour, if we're lucky. And here at Longmeadow, by far the best at the moment, is this giant fig. For about 3 or 4 days, it's the best thing in the garden. And I do know that the next time we have some wind and rain, they'll all come clattering to the ground. Now, Adam went to Essex to visit a garden which doesn't just allow its garden to fade into autumn, but deliberately plants for it and celebrates it.
And if you plan it right, the autumn garden can be filled with form, texture and beauty. I've come to the garden of designer Jeremy Allen near Colchester to see how he's created a space which celebrates the winding down of the year. Showing you can still have beauty even if the sun is only out a few hours a day. Jeremy's been working on this garden for 15 years. And here in the top garden, now filled with swaying grasses, the transformation has been dramatic. What was it like when you got here?
Well, it was a total jungle, really, this part in particular. So the first few years we were here, we spent most of that time, rather than creating a garden, just trying to clear the space so that we could then start to create a garden.
Yeah. So the area that we're in at the moment, how did you first set this piece out?
I knew I wanted to fill the whole area with plants. And what I actually did was get a piece of paisley cloth.
Yeah.
There are 7 large beds here, and I traced out the shapes of the paisley and fitted them together. But the idea was that as you approach, that you don't see the paths, so it appears to be one mass of planting.
So in a sense, you've got these lovely curvaceous shapes that just overlap each other.
Absolutely right, yeah.
Driven by a tie.
Absolutely. In actual fact, it was an old piece of curtain, but you're right.
It's brilliant. It's really lovely. This prairie planting sits on a steep east-facing slope. Low autumn light brings this space alive, shining through the structural seed heads of Actea, Veronicastrum, and illuminating clumps of Calamagrostis that glow and flow in the breeze. You've got the space and you can play, but actually there's a lot going on here that you could compact and put into a smaller space.
Absolutely. What we have here are really big drifts of plants, but you can slim all of those down in numbers and still achieve that same sort of effect and feeling in a much smaller space.
And you can see this place is still going to hold really good structure all the way through the winter?
Yeah, and I try not to cut any of this back until late March. You should always choose plants that die well, i.e. hold their structure throughout the winter. There's a huge amount of beauty still to be seen in the decaying forms of all these plants.
Further down from the loose and flowing top garden, Jeremy's laid out an area of more formal planting, including this long herbaceous border, still holding its colour and interest late into October. What was your approach for this to start with, and how has it evolved over time?
I think one of the things that I've tried to focus on is to choose plants which hold their form and hold their structure. So you're standing next to Amsonia, which I think's a really good example. So that was flowering in May or June, but here we have, I think, still a really nice shape to it, and you can see it's turning a lovely autumn yellow. You can feel now, as the garden's on the turn, the atmosphere is changing, and interestingly, the light's now changed. As we've said it, and straight away, things come alive, don't they? Absolutely. So that's what you look for in autumn, isn't it? That beautiful sunlight which is shining on those lovely autumn colours.
What I like that you've done as well is you've played with sort of soft bellow against really strong form.
I think that the solidity and architectural form that the hedges provide are a really important element in the garden. During the summer months, the floral colour in front of them looks absolutely lovely, but it's that definitive shape that helps carry you through the winter when there's so much less else to see.
Not only are these hedges gorgeous in their own right, they frame views and create hidden pockets of space, including this secret water garden tucked away behind high green walls. It's a garden where you're always wondering what's around the next corner. Every twist and turn in this garden, there's a surprise, and here Jeremy's turned an old ditch into a bog garden. And what I love about it is not just the zigzagging boards that are beautiful to move across, but you're looking down on the plants, so you have to engage in a slightly different way. And every time I go and look round one of these gardens, there's something that catches my eye, and I think I can take that idea home, put a twist on it, and call it my own. And I think this is just that. And there's one more surprise for me. You got a shrubbery, mate.
I have.
And not necessarily looked upon as being the coolest thing in the world.
Actually, I'm really happy to be able to create something which I think looks good and isn't particularly fashionable. It's nice to do something different. What's not to like about being completely enclosed by all these plants in here?
We're just on that turn. There's still some flowers holding on. I mean, things like the hydrangea, that'll sit there all winter, won't it?
Definitely. And when you get a heavy frost, it's that sort of form and shape with the frost sitting on it.
Yeah.
It looks lovely. So, yeah, the solidity of the plants in here do really take you right through winter.
I know this is a big garden, but I think Jeremy demonstrates that if you think about your space in layers, the trees, the shrubs, the herbaceous planting, you can really add more detail later into the year. And this detail doesn't have to be all about flowers. As we move from the bright hues of summer to the more relaxed tones of autumn, more subtle planting comes to life. Flowing grasses, clipped hedges, even the humble shrub. You wouldn't mind having a wander around here in the winter.
Autumn's beautiful, but there's no question that it's followed by winter. And as soon as those first frosts come, the vegetable garden shifts. And the first frost last night has had its impact. You can see the courgettes have been burnt, the French beans, those leaves are turning black. The Florence fennel is not really hardy, a little bit hardier than the courgettes and the beans, but they too will rot in the wet and the cold. However, things like the beetroot, like the radicchio, and of course all the brassicas are really hardy. But a problem that we've had over the last few years here at Longmeadow is a huge increase in pigeons. If I leave these cabbage, for example, unnetted, then the pigeons will rip them to shreds. So I'm just using canes like that. I've got two varieties of cabbage. I've got primo, which are the round ones, and then this pointed one is called greyhound. Right, that's the support. I'm putting these pots over the top so that the netting doesn't slip down. I'm using these terracotta pots, but you could use yogurt pots, cream pots. There we go. That's the easy bit. Now the netting. This is the old cricket net that we had on the cricket pitch, last used 20 years ago. But the netting has stayed. We've recycled it. But it doesn't stop me getting tangled, even though I do this every year. Now, of course, if you don't have a net, or don't want to use a net, you can use a scarecrow. People use old CDs. Anything to deter them. Use some bricks to weigh it down. It is important to make sure that it's taut, so birds won't get caught in it, and also so the pigeons can't land on it, weigh it down and eat the cabbages through the netting. I accept that my netting isn't going to win any prizes. It does look a bit rough. However, it'll do the job, and that's what matters, is to keep the pigeons off long enough for us to harvest them before they do. Now it's time to visit one of your gardens, and whilst I might not win any prizes at a competition, the local flower show and the competitions involved there play an important role.
Morning, it's Hannah here from Catsfield, East Sussex. I'm up really early this morning to prepare for a local village show, and I thought you might like to join me as I collect things to enter. So I only started entering village shows this year, but I've got so much out of it. I have 2 little boys and I can't spend a lot of time preparing, but I just wanted to share that it's still possible to enter, even if all you can do is get up on the morning of the show and dash around the garden and see what you can find, which is exactly what I'm going to do. So I've got a lovely pumpkin here, and I'm going to take some of this beautiful chard. Oh, there we go, that looks pretty good. Now I was hoping to enter some dahlias because they have been so good this year, but this is the best I've got. Not really up to scratch, but the category is the best dahlia in my garden today, so I might just enter it anyway. And finally we've got this giant Tromboncino squash, perfect for the funniest shaped vegetable category. I'm going to go and get all this cleaned up nicely now, ready to display. Wish me luck, chickens! So I'm just back from the show. My basket of veg, I got second prize. For this, I got first prize, but the biggest surprise of all was that I got a first for my dahlia, which I was not even going to take. So it just goes to show that your entries don't have to be perfect, and it really is about just taking part and putting in what you've got.
Come on, good boy. I think that's a pretty good result, Hannah. It certainly shows that whatever garden you've got, sharing and taking part is half the fun. Now this is the Long Walk. It's a grandiose name, but it's simply because it's long and there's a path and we walk down it. And it's deliberately very stark and simple because you have the cottage garden on one side, which is really busy, and the dual garden on the other side, which is even busier. And the idea, when I designed this, was to give just a cooling off space, just a moment to just stop all the action between these two rather different parts of the garden. And that applies to the planting as well. So obviously we have the permanent planting of the peach limes and the hornbeam hedges and the box pyramids. But also in between them forms a rill or a canal of flower. And I love that. I want to revamp that. So I've got wallflowers, which will run all the way down, and more daffodils. And of course with the wallflowers, we have that fabulous fragrance. Now, I've grown these wallflowers from seed. And this is Fire King, which is a wonderful sort of orange and touched with red. You can see they're pretty good plants. Wallflowers can be quite tricky to grow from seed because what you want is a nice, decent sized plant, and they can be slow to get going. And what I've learnt over the years is the secret is you sow them in some compost, and as soon as you can, get them out into garden soil. They grow much better in soil than they do in potting compost. Pop that in there like that. It's too late to grow any from seed now. They need to be sown in spring. But you can buy wallflowers as plants, bare root. I always used to get them from greengrocers wrapped up in newspaper, but a garden centre will sell them, usually in packs of about 10. But it's cheap, they're good value and highly recommended. As well as my wallflowers, I'm going to plant daffodils in amongst them. The first is this. It's February Gold, and it's quite a small bulb. You can see this is one of the very earliest daffodils to flower. It's not huge, it's pretty, It's petite, it's not tiny. You can grow it in pots perfectly successfully, but I like the delicacy. Now, I'm going to put 4 of these here, and I have them quite near the front. Now, the second daffodil is Yellow Cheerfulness. This flowers much later, won't begin to flower till mid-April, and sometimes will go on into May. It's taller, you can see from the bulb, much bigger, and has a lovely fragrance. So you've got the fragrance of the wallflowers, you've got this spicy fragrance of the daffodil, and because it's taller, it'll cope with the wallflowers. It won't be submerged by them. And on top of that, it's a double, so it looks really good. So to put them in the ground, just like that. Don't worry too much about the depth. The rule of thumb for all bulbs is the deeper the better, but as long as they're buried, they'll be fine. By repeating that all the way down, going right across the width of the garden, what we should have is a really rich springtime experience. And of course, you can do this on any scale. This would work perfectly well in a container. Now, obviously, I've got a lot to plant here, but we're going to Surrey, near Epsom, to visit the garden of Robert Ceredigion, where he combines both bits of jungle planting with desert.
When I first moved here, I thought, what better thing than to create this sort of escape in the back garden where I'm in my own little oasis away from the world. I wanted to create essentially an English garden, but using lots of exotic plants that remind me of my travels abroad. I wanted to create a very biodiverse space, something that attracted wildlife but was also dramatic and interesting. So the garden is 19 metres by 8 metres. When I moved here, it was a blank canvas and there was just a deck, a lawn and the cabin here. I replaced the lawn with a large pond and a path that curves through the garden, leads you on a little bit of a journey. I've got lots of arid plants at the back of the house. The end of the garden, it's north-facing up against my cabin, and so I've used that shadow to grow lots of ferns and other moisture-loving plants. I have a palm halfway through the garden, which is a Washingtonia, and that's a palm that comes from the desert. I included it here because it blurs the boundaries between the arid-loving plants and the moisture-loving plants. Looks very exotic. I want to quote a famous gardener called Beth Chatto, and she said that when she created her gardens, she wanted to create a mood, and that's really what I had in mind. I wanted it to be a really relaxing place to be, and I find water very relaxing, and so that was an important part that I wanted to include. I have one very large pond, 2.5 meters across. It's mainly for the frogs and newts, but all around it there's dragonflies flying around here. The inspiration here was the Singapore Botanic Gardens. I've tried to recreate some of the lush planting at the back here using hardy plants. And so I've got banana plants here and these gingers. This is Ceredigion tara, which has just started into flower. Lots of people say that I should be growing plants that are native to my area, but actually these exotics have been really good at encouraging pollinators. When you're creating a natural pond like this, it's important that you get lots of leaf cover from floating plants, and with this water lily, the more it grows, the clearer the water will get. This is a very special water lily called Denver. It's a hybrid of tropical water lily species and a hardy water lily species. The great thing with this is that it will flower with lots of hybrid vigour all the way through the summer, almost until the first frosts. I have 2 rectangular ponds either side of the steps, which give a sense of drama. In one of these ponds, I have a really stunning water lily with really dark red flowers. It's called Black Princess. And also, because 3 ponds aren't enough, I have 1 small pond by the house with a water canna called Erebus. So it lives as an aquatic plant with glaucous leaves emerging from the water, and then these amazing sort of pinky peach flowers. This is my arid border where I grow plants from arid regions of the world, and the star of the show has to be this Agave vatifolia, which is the whale-tongue agave. This agave comes from Mexico, where it can get very cold over winter, and so it's very well adapted to the climate here. I've had this agave for about 15 years, and in that time it's been out every winter and it's never had any cold damage. It's been covered in snow, frost. This is a really great prospect for anyone that wants to grow agaves in the UK. As the garden's quite small, I'm trying to utilise every surface, and so I've got climbers all around the garden. One of the stars is the passion flower. The flowers are incredibly intricate, and I think they're really exotic, which ties in nicely with the rest of the garden, but equally it would be well suited in any English country garden. I love putting the different parts of the garden together and using different plant combinations. So here I have an interesting combination of these fresh new Cycas revoluta leaves and Cosmos sulphureus. Here I've combined something very exotic looking along with something that you might find in more regular sort of English traditional garden. The orange of these flowers combines really nicely with the green of the cycad leaves. This cycad is very hardy. It's been out here for 2 winters, but in that time it hasn't shown any growth until this year, when it grew within the space of about 3 weeks from a tiny little shoot to this crown of amazing leaves. Sometimes there's a moment where you think you might give up with the plant because it hasn't shown any growth for a long time, but these very primitive plants can suddenly burst into growth, and before you know it, you've got a nice green plant again. I'm really proud of my garden. It's been a lot of work, and I can say that now everything's in place, I'm hoping to really enjoy it much more.
My guess is that Robert isn't going to sit back and just look at the work he's done and simply enjoy it. Someone who loves gardening as he does and with his passion for plants is going to want to plant more, to garden, to stay involved, maybe create a new garden. Now, the wind is picking up, and it's probably a timely moment if you've got buddleia and you live in an exposed area, just to trim it back. Now, this is not the final prune, but if you just take stems and reduce them by about half, that will do 2 things. 1, it will stop them breaking in the wind, and 2, you avoid root rot. Now, when you get lots of growth like this on a buddleia, the wind rocks it and it acts as a sail, and the roots that are holding it steady can break, and that will affect next year's performance. So by reducing the amount of top growth at this time of year, you are protecting it from the worst of winter storm. And then in March, you can give it its proper prune. And while I'm doing this job, here are your jobs for the weekend. Now is the time to plant hippeastrum, or better known as amaryllis, for flowering at the beginning of next year. Use a very free-draining compost, and you don't need too large a pot, just large enough to hold the bulb. And make sure that at least half the bulb is sitting proud of the surface. Top it up with some grit, which will help drainage and make it look good, and put it somewhere warm and bright, and the warmer the better. Water it well, and it should start to flower somewhere between Christmas and the New Year and brighten up the darkest days. It's a very good idea to insulate your greenhouse with bubble wrap to protect it from cold weather, save money and protect plants. However, before you do this, it's important to clean it. Brush the floor, scrub down the framework, and then clean the glass to let in as much light as possible. And this will also remove any fungal or disease problems that have accumulated over the summer months. Sowing peas now will give you an especially early harvest next spring. Choose a variety like these, Douce Provence, which is suitable for autumn sowing, and put them either into pots or root trainers. Water them well and put them somewhere warm to germinate. They should be ready to plant into a greenhouse or polytunnel in the new year, or outside into the garden as soon as the soil warms up. This is one of my favourite eating apples. It's called Jupiter. And it's got, for me, the perfect balance between sweetness and that necessary acidity that just gives a little bit of bite and depth to an apple. And it lasts really well, so it's worth picking carefully to store. This year, it's one of those apples that is a bit smaller than normal because of the drought, but the taste is very intense and good. And this bright red, distinctly small one, and is always small, is Gala, which is one of the last to ripen. Although it's bright red now, that will stay on the tree for another week or two. That's it for today. We will be back next week on Friday, but still at the later time of 9 o'clock after Autumn Watch, for our last programme in this series, so don't miss it. I'll see you next Friday. Till then, bye-bye.